Suddenly, for this moment at least, everyone seems to be paying attention. Poll after poll is showing roughly 3/4 of Americans support the protests that have exploded after the brutal killing of George Floyd as a sign of broader problems in policing and systemic racism in America at large. 8 in 10 Americans think the country is out of control. Bystander videos of Floyd's final moments on this planet, the forceful clearing of demonstrators from Lafayette Park just across from the White House, and the demographics of the American uprising have clarified any remaining questions about what is meant by the term American. Professor Eddie Glaude Jr., the James S. McDonald Distinguished University Professor in the Department of African American Studies at Princeton, joins me to help us all understand what this time means in the wider arc of American history.
It's a great question, but it's a difficult question. We are at an inflection point in this country, and it has everything to do with the contradictions that are in full view of a political and economic ideology that has governed the country for the last 40 to 50 years. So in some ways, what we're experiencing here in the US is the collapse of Reaganism, or the age of Reagan. And that involves certain kind of assumptions economically that have led to this extraordinary gap between the rich and the poor. So we have deep wealth inequality in this country, income inequality in this country. We see that everyday ordinary workers are busting their behinds to make ends meet in the context of a global pandemic that has thrown us into Great Depression-like numbers. You still have the rich and the really rich making millions and billions of dollars in this moment. So that kind of vulnerability and precarity is being expressed. At the same time, it's overlaid by the ongoing contradiction at the heart of the American experiment, and that has everything to do with white supremacy. It's the serpent wrapped around the legs of the table upon which the Constitution and Declaration of Independence were signed. And it threatens to swallow the whole thing, entirely, it seems to me. And over the last 50 years, we have seen politicians stoke white resentment, appeal to white fears. We have seen those fears and those resentments result in a policy of being tough on crime, a war on drugs, that have led to aggressive policing and in some ways the incarceration of Black folk and brown folk at alarming levels. It has resulted in the carceral state, where the United States incarcerates its citizens at rates that are astonishing compared to the rest of the world. So this is a result, I think, of all of those contradictions coming into view and kind of, shall we say, focused by the public lynching of George Floyd. And then I should add this footnote, and it's not really a footnote, it's central. You have organizers working on the ground, out of view, since 2014 and before. You have the Justice Investment Movement that's led to the Defund Police slogan. You have Black Lives Matter has been organizing in local communities ever since Mike Brown and before. So this is in some ways the result of I think an extraordinary organizing effort as well. Contradictions and organizing, they go hand in hand.
And that in turn has led to some kind of reassessment of the relationship between executive power and the citizens from whom it is derived. So where does this go from here? So what's the sense you get from all the students who graduate from your classes each year?
Well, I don't know. There's no guarantee that it will result in fundamental change. We already see forces trying to maintain the overarching frame of policing in the country. We see the bad faith arguments against defunding the police. But I think what we're going to see is the continued pressing by these various coalitions for the country to fundamentally change. I think we have a generation that has come to the conclusion that America is broken. And it's broken at every level. And the performance of autocratic and authoritarian power by Donald Trump only exacerbates that, only deepens exacerbates the problem and deepens the conclusion that American democracy is fundamentally broken. But there's no guarantee that we're going to come out on the other end of this with a more just set of social and economic and political arrangements. There's no guarantee. It all depends on what we do as we keep fighting and telling the truth in this moment.
Successive days of protests have proven that George Floyd died in 100% America, not some African American version of it. So for those who live in this America, what is the task that's cut out for the protest movement, for instance?
To tell the truth about what we've done and what we continue to do, to bear witness to the suffering, as James Baldwin would say, to make the suffering real. But more importantly, to fight for a more just world. We don't need charity or philanthropy. Right? We don't need white America to give us anything. What we need is to build a more just world where no matter the color of your skin, your zip code, or who you love, or your gender, or your physical ability, that you can not only dream dreams, but you can make those dreams a reality. So what we need more than anything is for folk to tell the truth and to repair. And in doing both, we could build a more just world, it seems to me.
When you say repair, it takes us all back to James Baldwin's lines, how much time do you want for your progress? We're in election year. Is this the time to repair?
Well, I think we're not only in an election year, we're at an inflection point. We're experiencing a moral reckoning in this country. And it seems to me that how we choose, what we decide to do, will determine the fate of generations. And it's not enough just to get rid of Donald Trump. He's an avatar for our sins. He's the easy target where we can displace our national sins onto him. Getting rid of Donald Trump is not sufficient. We have to change the entire frame. We've eviscerated any notion of the public good, torn to shreds a social safety net. We need to imagine a different way of being together and build a public infrastructure of care so that people can live differently. They can imagine differently. So we have a choice. And, you know, given America's history, as I've said over and over again, I'm not convinced that we're going to do well. I'm not convinced that we're going to make the right choice. But wherever there are human beings, because we've failed miserably in two other instances of this magnitude. So when you think of Reconstruction, radical Reconstruction, the passage of the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, which ended slavery, which extended voting, I mean, which due process and the like, right? Those Reconstruction amendments, when we think of the kind of reimagining of citizenship that happened, and then what happened immediately afterwards. We saw Jim Crow in the South. We saw convict leasing. In other words, the country doubled down on its ugly commitments to white supremacy. And literally a counter-revolution was led such that the nation could still imagine itself as a white nation. You think about the mid-20th century with the Black freedom struggle. And you know, you get the Voting Rights Act of 65, the Civil Rights Act of 64. You get legislation that comes out of the Great Society, but what do you get in response? You get calls for law and order, which led to the carceral state, mass incarceration. You get the tax revolt in California, which led to, in some ways, the defunding of the defunding of the social safety net. Why? Because people doubled down on this view that America is a white nation. So in the moments when we've had an opportunity to choose to be otherwise, we've doubled down on the ugliness. So here we have a chance, a moral reckoning. Our history suggests that we're too committed to this idea of white and give it up. If we don't this time, I'm not sure the country will survive.
So what does success look like for the Black Lives Matter movement?
It's a great question in the sense that it's not a question that asks me to kind of engage in these utopian imaginings, right? It's a question that's really about um, how might I measure, right, progress in these times, right? And it seems to me that it involves changing the frame. You know, we can call it Reaganism, we can call it Thatcherism, we can call it neoliberalism, right? We have to break the back of a political, economic, and philosophy that has devastated, right, our idea of the public good. We have to open up space for us to do the hard work of imagining how to live together. So how will I measure where I begin to see, right, the foundations of neoliberalism collapsing, right? And we're seeing it from the right. We're seeing Orban and Erdogan and Putin, and we see these conservative forces, they're fascist forces moving to say that there's no necessary relationship between markets and liberalism, no necessary relationship between flourishing and democracy. All of this is a reaction, in my view, to this ugly philosophy that has devastated everyday ordinary people, that exploits hatreds and fears and resentments. So how will I measure progress in this time where we begin to see the elements of neoliberalism disappearing, right? Having everything to do with the tax code, having everything to do with housing, having everything to do with the role of government in our lives, right? So we'll see. It's an echo, it's a haunting echo. Why it was the spark that lit the tinderbox, that's a question that historians and sociologists and theorists will have to ask. We never know what triggers these historical moments, but I think the juxtaposition of that violence, as you rightly note, the juxtaposition of that lynching with the theater of authoritarian power in Lafayette, I think has raised the question, right? Have we lost ourselves, right? Have we even lost the illusions of who we take ourselves to be, right? And I think with that, you saw the backlash from the military, you saw the backlash from certain parts of the Republican Party with regards to Lafayette Park. And, and I keep telling folks that the way the police responded to the protesters, if you bracket the tear gas and you bracket the rubber bullets, that's the way they police our communities every day. It's just aggression, contempt, insult, spite. So, people will clutch their pearls and ask the familiar question, oh my God, is this America? But it seems to me that we're at an inflection point. Again, I don't know where we will end up. I'm not, let's put it this way, as Du Bois, one of my favorite quotations, it's a hope, not unhopeful. It's a hope, not hopeless, but unhopeful.